when Bitcoin hit 100K, she was made aware that a lot of dumb money has flowed into Bitcoin, especially recently, again, when Bitcoin was reaching that 90K to 100K region. Hey guys, Alessio, hope you're well, and welcome to a brand new video update on Bitcoin. As I'm sure you know, I haven't posted a video on YouTube about Bitcoin for some time. So in this video, we're going to dig into the chart of Bitcoin and explain what could this mean for Bitcoin in the next several months as we finish this year, as we get close to Christmas and the holidays, and as we start the new year in 2025. What could 2025 hold in store for Bitcoin? Let's talk about this. All right, guys, join me. All right, guys, welcome back. Now, as you probably saw in my previous video, I'm not in London, not in the UK, thank goodness, because it's very cold right now. I am in sunny Florida in the United States, talking to you about Bitcoin and crypto. By the way, before we start, I would highly suggest, if you haven't seen my previous video that I posted recently about the stock market, make sure you go ahead and watch that, because what I'm going to say in this video will make much more sense if you've seen the previous video that I posted, and especially about this chart you're seeing here. A lot of it will make more sense about Bitcoin if you've seen my previous video again about the markets. So as far as Bitcoin is concerned, let me just do a quick recap. You may remember back in October when I was in Venice, I pointed out a very important signal on the chart of Bitcoin, which I think a lot of people might have ignored. Let me just play for you a very short clip of what I said back in October in Venice, and we'll come back. The MACD indicator looks potentially about to cross over in a positive direction. We may potentially see the blue line go above the red line, which I think is likely. That is what I think is going to happen. If we get a bullish positive crossover on the MACD, that could be a very strong early signal of potential bullish and positive movements on Bitcoin. All right, guys, thanks very much for watching that. As you saw back in October when I was in Italy, I was very bullish about Bitcoin. I was expecting a move higher on Bitcoin based on the MACD crossover that was about to happen. I think eventually it did happen. So guys, even back in October, before the major rally occurred in Bitcoin, before Bitcoin broke out to new highs, we were bullish and we were expecting a rally. We were expecting a breakout to the upside. And in fact, here's what I said in a member video back in October before the breakout occurred about the likely wave 5 in Bitcoin. So from the point of view of probabilities, this blue wave count seems to be much more likely. I think we saw capitulation just below 50K into the 49K support. And this is now, I believe, the larger degree wave 5 in the next several weeks and months, taking us into the upper zones. I think likely by the end of this year, we can see the wave 5 extend to much higher levels. Okay, so I think this wave 5 would take us eventually into not just 74, 75K, but eventually much higher levels, into the 85K, 93,650, and eventually 100K. Okay, so that to me seems much more probable, much more likely. All right, guys, as you heard in the member video back in October, again, we were expecting a breakout to the upside. I said actually that was a more likely scenario for Bitcoin. So we're expecting a move to 100K before that rally occurred. And guys, the reason I'm mentioning this, and it's important, is because a lot of people just don't appreciate that this is why Elliott wave theory is extremely helpful and useful to us, because it can give us a high probability indication of what could happen in the future. As I've said before, one of the reasons why we use Elliott wave theory is because it's the only method of analysis that gives you context, an idea where you are in the big picture, like a map. By the way, guys, before we continue, just want to quickly mention this. If you're looking for a safe and reliable trading platform which provides real-time data on stock markets, stocks, and crypto, then check out Radex, who is our sponsor for this video. Radex provides a secure and advanced trading platform with state-of-the-art technology. You get real-time data on stock markets, cryptos, metals, forex, and a whole bunch of other markets as well. Another good reason why you should try out Radex is their low spreads and 24/7 availability and customer support. And you can open an account with a deposit of $200. Make sure you use the link in the description to get started with Radex. And as mentioned, any money we get from sponsors we give to charity. Now, more recently, we've seen a pullback in Bitcoin. So we've seen a pullback on Bitcoin to the 100K to 90K range. But guys, if you look very carefully, you'll see that Bitcoin currently is above this long-term trend line. So if you go back a few years, now you can do this, for example, on a logarithmic chart. I personally like to draw trend lines on a non-logarithmic chart, on a standard chart, purely because trend lines actually are more accurate, more reliable when you use them on non-logarithmic standard charts. So for example, on this chart, you will see by connecting the highs, you will see that Bitcoin currently is above this trend line. It broke above the trend line and is currently hovering above it. Now, this trend line support on Bitcoin meets us at about 90K. In other words, for bulls on Bitcoin to be able to push this further higher to new highs, I would prefer to see Bitcoin remaining above this trend line, this long-term rising trend line, which is about 90K on Bitcoin. So I would personally say that this region between 90K to about 85, 80K is going to be extremely important for Bitcoin to protect. 85 to 80K is because that's approximately where the weekly 21 EMA would be located perhaps in a week or so. So I would say the region between 90K, or the trend line is, to about 85 to 80K is going to be extremely important for Bitcoin to protect if bulls are going to remain in control and push this crypto back up to new all-time highs. So for now, I'm not seeing any signs of a top. I should say the drop we had recently on Bitcoin was impulsive. It was composed of 5 smaller waves on the lower time frame. However, it's too soon to call. So even though there are some minor signs which are potentially concerning or negative, nevertheless, there is no sign at the moment of a top in Bitcoin, and there's no indication of a reversal in trend from bullish to bearish. However, I should say the most concerning thing that I've seen so far is not on the chart of Bitcoin, but on the chart that I mentioned recently in the previous video. Again, go and watch the previous video. And that was the chart of the 3-month versus 10-year yield curve inversion, or uninversion. And once again, this chart is courtesy of Manuel Blight at DowTheory.com. There has been an uninversion of the yield curve, as we see there, and usually when this happens, a recession follows about 6 to 18 months later, and the stock market usually tops after some weeks or months. It is impossible to predict exactly when the market tops after this uninversion signal occurs. However, as I mentioned in the previous video, it is a warning sign. It's a sign that we should be cautious. It is not a sign at the present time that the stock market is going to crash. No, at the present moment, it's simply a sign that we should be cautious, on our guard. It means that we should take a closer look at what's happening on the charts and what could happen in the next few weeks, but it does not mean that the market's going to reverse trend and fall into a bear market immediately. It could happen, it's a possibility, but at the present moment, it's not a high probability. So we'll see what happens in the next few weeks, whether that changes. So in a nutshell, my views on Bitcoin are actually quite simple. I'm seeing this most recent drop here as a temporary correction within the larger overall uptrend. So I'm still remaining cautiously long-term bullish as long as Bitcoin stays above this trend line. Again, as I mentioned, above this long-term trend line at 90K, provided Bitcoin stays above this support at between 90 to 80K, the path of least resistance and the trend remains to the upside. Now, if Bitcoin was to do the opposite and suddenly reverse and fall below this trend line, below 90K and below 80K, then that would be a strong warning sign that perhaps Bitcoin has topped. But I should say I'm not expecting that. I think it's a lower probability because I think the balance of probabilities at the moment here favors perhaps another push higher in the next several weeks and months. But again, that's only if Bitcoin respects and remains above that trendline support that I mentioned at 90K and also 80K. By the way, guys, I know some of you are probably thinking that I'm repeating myself here by repeating these points, but I'm doing that purely because to make myself very clear on certain key points. And again, I apologize if some of you find it frustrating that I repeat these points. But again, I'm only doing that for the purpose of clarity. And by the way, guys, let me just say something quite important here. My good friend Alexandra Overgog, who I'm sure you've seen before, now she said something quite interesting to me in an email. She said that when Bitcoin hit 100K, she was made aware that a lot of dumb money has flowed into Bitcoin, especially recently, again, when Bitcoin was reaching that 90K to 100K region. So Alexandra is warning that a lot of dumb money has been flowing into Bitcoin, again, opening accounts and getting into Bitcoin. Again, as I'm sure you know, the majority of people out there, they get into Bitcoin at the worst possible time. Back when nobody was interested in Bitcoin, I would say probably when Bitcoin was about 50 to 55K, at that time, nobody was paying attention. But as soon as Bitcoin rallied, went to 90K to 100K, suddenly the news media are talking about it, and now everybody's talking about it. In fact, I've lost count of how many people I meet in the street, people who don't know a single thing about Bitcoin, but suddenly they're very bullish, very optimistic and positive about Bitcoin. I've heard calls on Bitcoin to reach 500K. So again, a lot of people are getting extremely over bullish, over optimistic, perhaps extremely greedy on Bitcoin, and that is a concern. That is indeed a negative factor, especially if you're a contrarian like me. If you're a contrarian like me, then as I'm sure you know, when the crowd, when the herd, when they get extremely over bullish and optimistic and greedy about Bitcoin, that is a major red flag and a concern, indeed a potential warning sign for Bitcoin. It does not mean that Bitcoin has to top immediately and crash. No, it does not mean that. It does mean we should be very cautious though. So let's see what happens. I do think though that in the next 6 to 12 months in 2025, I think it's quite likely on the balance of probabilities that we're going to see a top in Bitcoin, as with the stock market. Now, we'll talk about this in a separate video. I don't have time for that today in this video, but I think it's quite probable, based on everything I'm seeing, a lot of data out there, that sometime in the next 6 to 12 months in 2025, it is quite likely we're going to see a top in Bitcoin and the stock markets as well. But again, guys, I'm not saying it's going to happen immediately. All I'm saying is that there's certain data out there that is telling us to be extremely cautious on both Bitcoin and the stock markets as we finish this year in 2024 and start the new year. All right, guys, as I mentioned before, I think for now, as long as Bitcoin stays above this key support level, the trendline support, for now, bulls of control, and the odds still favor a potential push, another push higher in the next several weeks and months. And by the way, guys, before I forget, I want to wish you a phenomenal Christmas and a wonderful holiday as we enter the holiday season.